Well, the results for the 2019-2020 Imminent Persons Group have been released and have raised some questions regarding the transformation of various sporting federations in South Africa. The EPG is released annually and is tasked with documenting at the rate in which South African sporting bodies are facilitating transformation on all levels. It was back in 2016, prompted by the then Sports Minister, Fikile Mbalula, to ban the country's rugby, cricket and athletics bodies from bidding for or hosting any major international events because of their transformation results. We're now joined by the Minister of Sport here in South Africa, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, to discuss the latest results. Mr. Mthethwa, thank you very much for your time. It is a pleasure, as always, to have you on the show tonight. Firstly, your thoughts then on the original findings by this year's EPG report.
Thanks, Marc, and to your viewers. The results are presenting and painting a mixed bag with a lot of concern on some of the sporting codes which have been found wanting, especially on the barometer. And remember that this exercise is done together with sporting bodies. So the targets which are set have to be met because they are done together with the sporting bodies themselves. So some of the sporting codes which continue to be giving us challenge when it comes to transformation would be sporting codes like swimming, hockey, juske and tennis, gymnastics. So those ones we had to think what to do, how do we move forward, and what needs to be done. Of course, we will do all what we'll do in consultation with the sporting codes, but making it a point that the transformation in sport is an imperative, and any possibility of regress is not something which is going to be welcomed from the point of view of government.
Mr. Mthethwa, you mentioned that some sporting bodies are providing some concerns. Back in 2016, we mentioned that then Sports Minister Fikile Mbalula put some pretty serious punitive measures towards some of those federations that were not performing. You mentioned swimming, hockey, basketball, etc. What punitive measures can we expect against those federations that are not performing as they should be?
The approach has not been starting from the punitive action, as we have just alluded to, over a period of time. It has been trying to reason and nudge different sporting codes to play the ball. But it doesn't rule out being effective in implementing the enforcement mechanisms which are there, contained within the barometer process. So one of the weaknesses, if I may say, in the past, which has made people, especially certain sporting codes, to think that there is an option of not transforming, is that we have not enforced the sanctions which are there in the barometer. Because remember, initially with the charter there was no enforcement regime, but here there is enforcement. And what I'm saying is that within the regulatory environment of sport, we have enough ammunition to use in order to push different sporting codes towards the right direction. Gone are the days where people would say that no, but because we collect a lot of trophies and medals, come with medals at home and so on, so therefore even if we don't transform, there's nothing. No, it's a big deal. If there's no transformation, it's a big deal. But remember also that we are raising that from the point of view of the sheer political will. from the bodies themselves. But there's another area, which is the area of development. As you would have seen in the report, that the weakness of the lack of school sport is again highlighted. And I've gone through different reports from different periods. This matter seems to be a perennial problem, and I think that going forward, we'll have to look at what other means we employ together with my counterpart Minister of Basic Education to ensure that school sport takes its rightful place so that it becomes a necessary feeder to the national teams, as it were.
I'm glad you mentioned school sports, Mr. Mthethwa, because that's where I wanted to take the conversation next. We know how vitally important it is for the survival and for the growth of sports around South Africa. For those federations, perhaps, that are looking for some assistance, how can they then work alongside the department to ensure that the growth of their particular sporting code at school level can then grow and transform?
That is why I'm saying that perhaps we need to look beyond what we have. We have the MOU with the Department of Basic Education. Quite clearly, something is not gelling in the process and in the system. So it therefore means that we would want to think beyond or outside of the box and see what kind of a shock to the system would be needed to be employed. And what kind of assistance, because to a certain degree, there are some systemic problems which we've got to deal with related to the access to facilities, for instance, which continues to bedevil our sporting fraternity, as it were. So I think that we are going to go back to the drawing board and see that where we need to play our role, to what extent will we be able to do that, and where other partners need to move, and to what extent do we nudge them to move, because there's been a lot of talk about transformation. At one point you see some progress, and in some instances there's regress. For instance, the report, as it is highlighting some of the progress areas related to areas like rugby, cricket, football, and so on. Now, the question is, because this is the report of 2018-2019, are we going to sustain what has been pointed out by this report, or is there a possibility of regress? So where we move forward, we want to ensure that there is no turning back, but where we have not moved, we push rather with much more accelerated speed those who have not transformed to get to the transformation arena.
Mr. Mthethwa, federations like rowing and bowls are characteristically very slow changing, and demographically have often been in predominantly white areas. So how would you then try and ensure that sporting codes like those have survival going forward, that they can be transformed, because we certainly haven't been seeing that transformation in the past?
That's precisely why we are saying that there is no excuse not to show even attempts of any sporting body to have moved in the process of transformation, including reaching out for inclusivity. And then we look at that what then is needed to ensure that this inclusive approach is indeed authentic, it happens, and so on. So we will always raise these things if we see that there is any lacking behind of any of the sporting bodies, including sporting codes. There is no way that, part of what the report says is that you are going to have a situation where you'll have lesser and lesser, in terms of the demographics, lesser and lesser amongst youth, young whites, who will be eligible and available to play. So if you have sporting codes which are exclusively white, you stand a chance of a challenge, an existential challenge in that particular sporting code. So we definitely are not going to be leaving any sporting code untouched and unchecked.
Mr. Mthethwa, before I let you go tonight, sir, the 1st of June welcomed in level 3 and the return of professional non-contact sport. I have no doubt that some federations perhaps are still looking and hoping for a little bit more information. We're wondering just when perhaps the new regulations from level 3 will be gazetted.
We hope they will be gazetted this week, because remember what happened last week. We went out, shared with the South Africans the new directions for the opening up of sport, and it coincided, as you know, with what the government is dealing with now, the case which is challenging not the directions, but the regulations themselves. So open and put the direction where the
Mr. Mthethwa, you are breaking up slightly. Let me see if I can just try and squeeze in one final question. Have you received any feedback from the PSL and SAFA? We know that they were set to meet with you, if I'm not mistaken, last week sometime. Football, we know, is, as many would describe, the heartbeat of sport in South Africa. Have you received some feedback from the football bodies in SA?
Yes, we'll be meeting with football leadership this week, because the Joint Liaison Committee met between the two, SAFA, which is the motherboard of football, and PSL. They met last week. So this week then we'll be getting this feedback, which is ready. We'll be engaging on it. And what would guide us, as we always say, is protecting lives on one hand, and sustainability of livelihood. So as we do whatever engagement, we look into those things that we are on course, because one is very much dependent to the other. But most importantly, our point of departure is that lives is more important than anything else.
Mr. Mthethwa, thank you for your time. We do appreciate it as always, sir. We look forward to having you back onto the show again in the near future. The Sports Minister here in South Africa, Mr. Nathi Mthethwa, giving us some feedback, not just on the EPG report and the transformation around sports, but potentially around the return of football as well.